Electronic maps, hey, they're all over the place. We can access them on smartphones, on tablets, in a variety of ways. But what happens if you do that while you're driving an automobile? Well, it takes us to this week's case. It involves a real man, Stephen Spriggs, lived in California. He's driving in Fresno. Heavy traffic jam took place. Construction was going on ahead of him, big mess, and he pulled out his iPhone, immediately tried to find some way on an iPhone map that would allow him to get around that mess that was in front of him. Well, traffic was all but stopped, and as he's sitting there looking at his iPhone, suddenly a CHP officer pulls up next to him on a motorcycle, says, "Is that a phone in your hand?" He said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Well, guess what? You get a ticket. You get a ticket, because here in California, it's against the law to have a wireless telephone in your hand and use it while you are driving an automobile." Well, Stephen said, "Hey, that can't be right. That can't be right. I wasn't texting. I wasn't emailing. I wasn't even talking on the phone. I wasn't doing anything that you're not supposed to use phones for when you're driving. I am not happy with this." And he took his case before a state magistrate. Now, state magistrate heard his plea, heard his argument, and said, "Guess what? You're guilty. You have violated the state statute and you owe the $160. Stephen wasn't pleased with this at all. He was trained as a lawyer, but wasn't practicing as a lawyer. And he said, "I'm going to appeal this." And in California, when this kind of thing happens, you move from the state magistrate to a 3-panel appellate judge panel that is in the Superior Court. And he did that. And the 3-judge panel heard his case and his arguments. And his arguments were, you know what? I understand why the statute exists, because you don't want people talking on their phones, texting, or sending emails from their smartphones. But I wasn't doing any of that. I was just trying to get directions. And, I could have reached over, grabbed the map, done something else, been trying to unfold it, and that would have been more dangerous than just looking on my smartphone to try and find directions. Therefore, I don't think that I violated the statute. Court looked at it and said, "You know what? The statute's pretty simple. It provides that a motorist, while operating an automobile, cannot use a handheld wireless telephone." So it was a wireless telephone, it was handheld, you had it in your hand, therefore, while you were operating that vehicle, you were violating the statute, and you owe the $160. Well, the court said, in its opinion, interestingly enough, that possibly the statute might need to be reviewed by the legislature. I mean, the legislature passes the law, the courts take a look at the laws to see whether or not they pass constitutional muster and various other forms of doctrines that we impose on legislation. And the court was saying, you guys on the legislature might want to take a look at this, because I don't think you intended necessarily to prohibit all use of handheld smartphones, because at the time the legislation was passed, we didn't realize all the things smartphones later have been able to do. But nonetheless, when we look at this, the court went on to say, we find that since it says you cannot use a handheld wireless telephone while operating a vehicle, well, when there's a violation of that and the person's using it for any reason, consulting a map or whatever else, that is a violation of the statute. And honestly, you guys up there in the legislature might want to really keep it this way, because sometimes any kind of distraction that a driver has looking at a smartphone and getting information can be hazardous. So, the point is, we today, the court said, find that there was a violation of the statute, and accordingly, the fine must be paid of $160. All right, so what do we learn from this case? What do we learn from this case? Well, what we learned from this case is something that we have visited previously here, and that is the legislature will pass the law. It goes into statute. And sometimes it'll be a compromise bill. Sometimes the language is intended to basically do one function, but when it's looked at in a different context, it winds up doing something else. Clearly, the California legislature intended that people should not talk or text or email while they're driving. But it did not address specifically use of such things as electronic maps. Some people will say, in view of this, Stephen did not violate the law. Other people will say, but no, the law is pretty clear. It says any use of a handheld wireless telephone while driving is violation of the statute, and that's all it needs to say. The point being that sometimes there can be ambiguity in the statute, and the role of the court is to take a look at it in the specific case in which it is being applied and apply the actual language that exists. And that's the simple role of the court. And sometimes, as a result of this, you get decisions and you get findings that are not entirely what the legislature intended because they hadn't thought through the development of technology or thought through all of the very, very extremely different kinds of things that can happen in human conduct and interaction. So, the point we learn is very simple. When the legislature makes the law, the courts are bound to follow it, and sometimes the reaction and the result is not exactly what the legislature intended. Other people will say it's exactly what the legislature intended. You decide. We bring you this case as we bring you cases every week so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.